Hi there. My name is Sheila. I'm with Ponderosa Plains Farm. We are a lavender farm in Elizabeth, Colorado. And obviously, we sell lavender and lavender products. We also sell things like jams and honey, eggs, hand sanitizer, um, plants, lots of different things. Um, so, uh, we have this idea. A lot of people now are starting new gardens for the first time. And so last week we did a session on how to start seedlings, and you can check that out on our YouTube if you like. And today I wanted to get us out in the garden and actually planning to plant. Now, out here in Elbert County, some things have already been direct sown, but there's also a lot of things that we can't sow for another month, put in for another month, and those are the seedlings that we started inside, and then we talked about both of those last time. And again, go ahead and check out that video. Today, though, we're going to talk about designing your garden. We're going to talk about your structure and amendments. We talked about that a lot last time, but there's a few amendments that I wanted to mention that you may want to plan to put in your garden before you plant. I also want to talk about protecting plants and soil from the elements, and also pets and pests, and then some conditions to look out for. Now, this is all stuff that I have had experience with, so may not be able to talk about things that I haven't had to deal with. But anyway, I thought this would be a good starting point. These are things that I certainly wish that I would have known when I started gardening. So on garden design, the first thing you have to do is you have to determine what kind of gardener you want to be, because there is, the gardening like what my parents did was they had a huge plot of land. They went out there and they tilled the whole thing, and then they made rows, and it was huge, and it was a big project, and I think that they found it very satisfying. As a teenager, I don't think it was my thing, but I can see the attraction now. On the other end of the extreme is maybe your style as a gardener is, taking a watering can out to your deck while you have a martini. And that can be very satisfying too. In fact, that's kind of where I started. and there's a lot of pride to be had in growing things that you get to eat. Other people, maybe they're more creative or they want to try more experimental things. So you might try hugelkultur beds, which I'm not going to talk about, but I know people who do this, and I can certainly put you in touch with them. And also straw bale beds. I know a lot of people who do that. So let me know if that's something that you're interested in, and I can put you in touch with some resources on that. Now, some of us like raised beds. Raised beds are pretty popular, and you might want to do one that maybe hip high, where you don't have to bend over a lot, and it's going to take a lot more dirt, but actually I can see the attraction to it. Now, you can see here in our garden, what I opted to do was a lower raised bed. So I don't really mind bending over so much, but our yard is shared with our dogs. This is their fenced yard that they have access to. And so I wanted to create a defined space where this is the garden bed and this is where the dog goes. And that worked actually for a while with our older dogs. It wasn't a problem. But the other reason I wanted to do this, I wanted pathways, because I didn't really want to walk through mud. There are narrow channels to get to my food, but that was me, and that's how I wanted to do things. And so we designed these. Some of these are 4x4s and some are 4x8s, and they're pretty easy to reach across and work with. So this is how we did it. The next thing, once you've decided like how you want to do it, you'll need to map out your space, how you want to do it. But if you have a large field that you're tilling in, you're going to want to create zones. You want to do that with hugelkultur and with straw bale beds. And certainly if you have raised beds, you're going to want to make some plans about what kinds of plants you'll be putting in different areas of your yard. And you want to look to those resources that I mentioned in my last video, or the last Zoom that we did, you're looking at, okay, how much sun do we need? How much shade do these plants need? How far am I from water? How am I going to get water to my plants? What temperatures do they want to be at? And take those things into account, because you can, for instance, maybe most plants want some warmth when they're first starting, but toward July and August, some certain plants might be kind of like, oh, the sun's too intense, it's too hot. So you might be able to start them at the same time as a plant that's going to get taller. So that taller plant would be on the south side, and your cool, loving, shade-loving plant would be on the north side, and they can get a little bit of protection from the sun that way. So those are things to take into consideration when you're planting. Also, maybe you don't have a yard like ours. Our yard, right now, we're kind of in the shade because it's very late in the afternoon, but we will get sunlight coming into the middle of the yard in the morning, usually from the north and a little bit from the south. And then, of course, midday, the sun is directly overhead. And then we have these ponderosa trees over here that give us a little bit of shade in the afternoon. The plants that are closest to the house over here actually have some shade-loving kale sitting out here hardening right now, and those don't get very much shade in the morning. In fact, they probably get the least amount of sun during the day, because they're going to get hit with the shade in the afternoon, shade in the morning, and they're just going to get that midday sun. So we have a few little zones within our yard that we can work with, but you might not have that. And so you may want to have two gardens, one for your shade plants and one for your sun-loving plants. Another consideration, too, is that you can use containers. So right now, these are my oregano plants down here. I just brought them out. They've been in the house over the summer. I normally put oregano in the ground because it is somewhat invasive, or in pots. I put it in pots because it's somewhat invasive, and I don't really want it through the whole garden. And it's also nice to have it inside during the summer or during the winter. But during the summer, it's going to be fine out here. It's going to like it out here. These are hardening off a little bit, so I'm giving them a little bit more shade than I normally would for oregano. But this is an option to go to containers, and you can put the containers in a shaded area, and or even make a special bed that's on a shaded side of your house. So you can do those kinds of things separate from the rest of your garden if you have more plants of one type than the other, and you just don't have the right area for all of them. So yeah, there's that. So that's kind of like how you might, the things that you might take into consideration when planting a garden. You might also want to plan on considering companion and nemesis plants. So certain plants do well next to each other, and some plants don't. And there's a lot of charts and tables and lists of this online. I suggest you go and check those out. I'm not really an expert on it. What I normally do is I will plan out my garden, I'll get it all mapped out, and then I'll go check the list and go, okay, did I get nemesis plants next to each other? Like a good example is like tomatoes and cucumbers don't really love being next to one another. I've actually tried that, and the cucumbers didn't do real well next to the tomatoes. And I actually have basil. Everybody loves basil. It's one of those plants you put it in there, and everybody around them thrives. So basil's a good plant for that. So that's another thing to take into consideration. Like I said, I normally do that after I've done my mapping out, and then I kind of go, well, maybe I need to move some things around. Your soil structure and amendments. So we talked a lot about soil last time, and I still recommend John Giovanni's book, How to Grow More Vegetables. I just think it's a really great book about soil. But I want to show you here kind of what we were talking about, because we were in the house last time. So this is some soil that we worked on last week, and you can see this is some soil that we worked on last week. Sorry about the camera. You can see that it's it's loose and it's rich and it's aerated, so we worked it over pretty well with a garden fork, and I think this week we formed a few clumps because it's been out in the sun here. I keep the shade cover on to keep it from baking too much, and I'll probably have to come in with a fork one more time before I plant. But you can see it's just coming apart really easy. So these aren't really hard clumps or anything. It's nice looking soil, and I'm keeping this shade cover on just to protect it a little bit. But this is the soil that we're talking about, that loamy, nice, rich soil. But there are other amendments, what we talked about last time was that to come in and work your soil and get it nice and loose, and then add compost, which is kind of a universal fix for any soil. It's got nutrients, it helps with drainage, it helps with water retention. Whatever your problems are, it's a good solution. And there are some other things that you might want to consider. So you might want to consider pH. If you have alkaline soil or acidic soil, you may need to make some adjustments to the pH. I've never had to deal with that. My soil comes out pretty neutral all of the time. But I'd say once you worked in your compost into your soil, you might want to take some samples and do some tests. And you can buy some at-home tests. You can buy them online, and you can find them at Lowe's or Home Depot, and sometimes in garden shops. And what they'll test for is they'll test the pH of your soil, they'll test the nitrogen content, they'll test the phosphorus content or phosphate content, and the potassium content. And those last three are known as NPK, nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. Potassium's elemental symbol is K. So the way those tests work, so if you've got multiple parts of your beds that you want to test, and you may want to buy several tests because they take about a day to do. So you take some soil, you put it in water, you let the sediment filter out, and then you take sample water and you mix it with a little chemical that comes in the kit, and then you compare the color on a color chart, and it will tell you, do you have a lot of nitrogen or a nitrogen deficiency? Do you have a lot of potassium or potassium deficiency? And so then you can figure out whether or not you need to add something to it. So for instance, if you're coming up low in phosphate, you might add bone meal, which is a really good source of phosphate. And you can do that before your plants get in, and you just put that down, and you come back in with your garden fork and you turn it into the soil. But there are other soil amendments and fertilizers, and there's a lot of really good organic fertilizers you can find in stores if that's the direction that you want to go with your gardening. Now, you'll want to be able to read the labels, and I'm afraid they assume everybody knows gardening, like has PhDs in gardening or something. So on each on fertilizer bags, you will find 3 digits separated by dashes, and those stand for NPK. So the first number is going to be these are ratios. So the first number is the ratio of nitrogen, second number to the ratio of phosphate, third number to the ratio of potassium. So if you need more nitrogen, you're going to want one with where the first number is higher. If you need more phosphate, you're going to want one with the second number higher. And if you need more potassium, you're going to want one with the third number higher. So that's what NPK is, the order of the numbers that are on those packages. And that's how you read a fertilizer package. So yeah, and like I say, you just put the fertilizer down and you work it into the soil just like you would your compost, and then you're good to go. Other things, there's special amendments you need to keep in mind. Here you can see where we've got this loose kind of cover around where I'm planning to put my tomatoes. This is where we actually just planted peas. Now, peas need an inoculant, and that is a microbe that helps the peas grow, to germinate. And so you may need to purchase an inoculant to put down. If it's the first time you put peas in the ground there, you should add an inoculant. If you've grown peas there before, then you already know the microbe is in the ground there. So you're good to go. And other amendments, I mean, it just kind of depends on what your needs are and what's going on. One thing that I'll often add where I'm putting my tomatoes is I'll put in some calcium. Calcium deficiency is kind of is linked to blossom end rot, and so you could lose a lot of fruit to blossom end rot. But understand, and we'll talk about this later, that blossom end rot is not necessarily mean that you don't have the calcium in the soil. It actually has more to do with the plant's ability to take it up. But it doesn't hurt to put just a little bit of calcium down before you put your tomatoes in, and that way you're not trying to amend your soil after your tomatoes are already in the ground and you've got roots growing there. And I think it's worth mentioning nature's helper, and that is worms. Now, I don't buy worms every year, but I do about every other year just to get diversity in the genetic line of worms, assuming they procreate like that, because I don't really know. I'm sure I learned it in a biology class once and forgot. But anyway, I do put in new worms every couple of years, and we have a lot of worms in our soil. And what they're going to do is they're going to go through your soil and they're going to aerate it, and they're going to break down matter that's in the soil and turn it into nutrients for your plants. So they're really, really good for your plants, and I think it's worth investing in them every once in a while. So then we get to protecting plants. So over here you can see this is one of my onion beds. I plant my onions in August. I do this with garlic too, and I let them root, and then around the first frost I put in a deep mulch. You can see there's a lot of straw in there, and then when we start to get to freezing temperatures, I put them in a frost cover, which is what this white material is here. So the frost cover, what it does is I actually pin it into the ground, and it's got a wire frame over them, and it's going to let moisture through and air through, but it's also going to hold heat in that comes in from the sun. The sun comes through the barrier, heats up the area inside there, and it keeps that soil a little bit warmer than outside temperature. And so it kind of helps them weather the winter. In the springtime, you have to be careful. So on nights, when we got to the point where maybe we had nights in the mid to high 30s, but the days were getting warmer, I left the covers on, but I opened up the ends so that it just didn't get too hot in there during the day, because it can get very hot under these covers. And then recently, as our days have gotten really warm and the nights now we're in the 40s, and these can actually take snow. They'll be fine with the temperatures that are coming for the rest of the spring, so they don't really need to be covered. But they also haven't been exposed to our sun all winter long, so they're still a little sun shy. So I just opened up one side to make sure that they got air in, but I left the cover over to give them a little bit of light diffusion. Here in another week or so, I'll open up the other side, and that's going to let more light in, and that's when we're really going to start hardening off the leaves and making them more sun hardy. But the main purpose for frost covers is to keep them warm during the winter. You can use them if you raise them high above the plants as shade covers also, and they'll let through a bright diffuse light. Which actually brings me to the topic of shade covers. So this right here on the ground, this is a shade cover, and I'm using it to protect my new soil that doesn't have, I haven't planted anything there, but I've worked the soil, so I don't want it to cook in the sun, and so I've just thrown a shade cover over to give it to some protection. And then over here, I have some shade-loving plants, and you can see that kale back there, particularly the stuff that's way back in the shade, is loving it back there, and I have a little shade cover over that barrier. And we're actually going to move that kale out to the front to an area that's completely covered in trees, and those will be ornamental kale at some point. But right now we're just letting them grow out here. And then this spot will eventually be our lettuce. We have parsnips and carrots in here, and the parsnips and carrots want sunlight, so that's why they're not under a shade cover too. Next, shade covers. Another thing about these shade covers is when I hang my shade covers, you'll see here that we have these low posts. These were the original posts that we had before we added these screens on the side, and I'll explain why they're there later. We would hang the shade covers on these posts, and so it would hang like a canopy over. And we can hang them higher if we want to, so we can adjust the height. But the beauty of these, and I tend to leave mine on longer than I should, my shade covers, but that's because here in Elbert County in June we get hail. And it's pop-up hail, and it's like suddenly a storm blows in, and these will catch hail. But another solution that I've seen some people use, and I think it's a really grand idea, is they'll take chicken wire and they will suspend the chicken wire over the bed, and that will catch large drops of hail. And I hear people have really great success with that, and it will let through more light than these shade covers. So that's another thing to consider. If you're worried about hail, you can use shade covers. Frost covers can work and let through more light. And then, of course, you have also the wire option as well. Mulch. Now, you see that I put some light layer of mulch down in some of the beds where I have things planted. And then over in the onions, those were under deep mulch. So the difference is that the light layer of mulch is more about just, I want to let light through because I planted something there, but I also want to protect the soil around it. Now, once those plants come up and I see little leafy stalks, then I'll come in and I'll drop in a heavier mulch. And that mulch will help keep weeds down. And you have to be careful with your mulches. Particularly, I use straw, and a lot of times straw has weeds in it. And but I usually use it after my chickens have picked it apart pretty well. So, but there's other mulch options that you can use. But the whole purpose is to just keep the weeds down around your plants and protect your soil. So that's where mulch comes in. Plastic sheeting, I don't have an example of that here. I have used it before, actually, to create a more tropical environment, because here it's very dry, and in the evenings it gets very cool. So when you have plants that want really hot or very warm soil and higher humidity, you can lay a piece of clear plastic sheeting on your dark soil, and then you cut slits in it, and those slits are where you plant your plant. And during the day, the sun will shine through your plastic sheeting and warm that darker soil underneath. And then at night, that plastic sheeting will hold that temperature, and it'll also hold in moisture. So you can kind of create a warmer, more humid environment right here in Colorado with plastic sheeting. And then the last thing is windbreaks. And there's so many ways you can do windbreaks. You can use plastic sheeting. You can use cloth windbreaks. You can take a wooden pallet and lean it up against your garden bed. Whatever you think, whatever you have on hand will work. Now, this is one thing that I use sometimes, and that is I'll take the plastic shipping wrap where they wrap around pallets, or movers use them a lot. I'll wrap those around my bed. So I'll take a bed like this, and I'll just wrap a strip around a couple of times to make a nice band, and I won't necessarily go all the way up or down the body of it, but just through the middle to create a small windbreak. And that's oftentimes, if I don't have time to get a fan on my indoor plants to harden them against the wind, I'll do that instead. So yeah, that's kind of ways that you can protect your soil, protect your plants. You really want to protect your soil because there are microbes alive in there, and it's important that their environment be maintained for the health of your plants as well. So let's see, pets and pests. So the first one you have to consider out here in Elbert County is deer. So in our house, we use this 8-foot deer fence, and it goes all the way around our garden area up to the house. And I've understand that deer can jump a 6-foot fence. I'm sure it slows them down or makes them think about it for a long time. We have an 8-foot fence, and we haven't had any problems. No deer have ever come into our garden. So that works out really well. But I imagine there are other ways, like you can see we've got these frames on here also, which I'm about to talk about. And these could be made sturdier so that they could keep the deer out. Now, these frames are actually because about a year ago, we got a new dog, and she thought, she was the first dog we ever had that thought that the garden beds were a great place to dig and play, and the irrigation system was something fun to chew on. And so we built these frames to go around the bed. We used actually deer fencing on them. And they're, like I said, these are not, real strong. They're just meant to deter her from jumping into the bed and digging around. So that is their purpose. But they can have multiple purposes too. Other pet problems can be cats. Cats can probably jump these, but they'd have to really, really, really want to get in there. Cats are usually looking for a place to scoop out, to make a nice place to lie down. They are sometimes looking for a litter box, and you really don't want them making a litter box out of your garden. So something like this can help. Then chickens are like a garden nemesis, and we have kept chickens out in this garden. And when we did, I used to take that plastic sheeting and put it part way up, and that worked when they were young. But once they got older, they would figure out they could jump over it, and they would get in there and just wreak havoc, because they will dig up your roots and they will knock over your plants while they're hunting for worms and bugs. And they love it, and they're great at it. But I actually keep them out of this garden for the most part and let them play in our compost. They are excellent at turning your compost and adding manure to your compost. They're wonderful at that, and more power to them. But in here, not so much. Now, sometimes I will bring my chickens out here in the fall after I pull plants out and kind of let them have at it. It's fun for them, and it does work some manure into the soil. So so I have done that before with my chickens, but mostly they don't work in gardens. Rabbits. So we've never had problems with rabbits coming through our deer fencing here, but we actually have some of this fencing around the chicken coop, or for some reason they like to chew through to get into the chicken coop. And so what our solution was there was we took chicken wire and just a low level and attached it to this to the deer fencing, and that kept them out. But you can also bury it down a little bit in case you have burrowing animals. And so that's one way to keep rabbits out. Now with the other, we're going to talk some more about insects, different kinds of bugs. One of the most problematic for us out here is we get a lot of grasshoppers. And what I use is this. It's called no-low bait. I get it from Arbico Organics. Last year, they were in the Durango fire, and they lost their facility, so they were actually rationing this last year. You couldn't get but a pound. And you can get a little more this year. I can tell you that when we didn't have it last year, we had a lot more problems with grasshoppers. In years where we put it down in multiple applications, we've had no problems with grasshoppers. So it really does work. And how it works is, this is the beauty of it, is that it's actually going to harm no animal, just the grasshoppers. So no-low bait is a microbe that you put out when the grasshoppers are still pretty young, and you can put it out when they're older too, but it's better if you put them out when they're about 1/2 inch, and you just spread it around in tall grassy areas that they like, and they will ingest it, and it will inhibit their ability to take in nutrients, and they will starve out. And the nice thing about that is that it doesn't affect other bugs, so it's not going to affect your bees or your ladybugs, your beneficial bugs, and it also doesn't affect animals. So if one of your chickens comes along and eats a grasshopper that has ingested no-low bait, it's actually not going to hurt your chickens or any other animals. So it really only affects grasshoppers. So that's the beauty of that. Then let's see. Oh, aphids and whiteflies. We don't have too big of a problem, but when, with those, I see them sometimes. But mostly what we do is every year I buy ladybugs. So I'll buy 1,000, 2,000, sometimes 5,000 ladybugs. And we have them here. There's native ladybugs. We see them in the wintertime in the house. And of course, we see them oftentimes before I put any ladybugs out. But I just like to keep adding more. And, they'll fly off and disperse, but the main idea is that their larva eats the whitefly larva. And so we don't really have a lot of problems with it. And I think that in large part because we're using the ladybugs, so they're a good beneficial bug and you don't want to kill them with using insecticides and things like that. Slugs. Slugs are probably one of my favorite ones because I get them in my lettuce. They love that nice, cool, wet area. And so I'll come out in the morning and I'll find slugs all over the place. But you can use beer traps. So beer traps are, you take a cup, or I'll cut the bottoms off of plastic water bottles and put it in the ground so that the lip is even with the dirt. And then you put in beer. And they like stinky beer, so you're going to have to use the good stuff. Which makes my husband so mad when I use this good beer on my slugs. But during the night, what will happen is they'll be attracted to the beer. They fall into the cup. They can't get out. They drown. And then the only maintenance you really have to do is refilling the beer. And you do have, I would suggest going by every morning and just picking up the dead slugs. And if you have chickens love pickled slugs. It is a delicacy for chickens. So something to think about there. And then the last one I've seen in the garden is a horned worm, which will eat your tomato leaves and things like that. And I haven't had them in any quantities that they concern me. I understand that if you do have a problem, parasitic wasps are a solution. The ones I get, I know ones and twos. I pick them off and I take them out and feed them to the chickens, and they think that that's super fantastic. So yeah, that is pests. Now, along those lines, though, and is different conditions that your plant can get, and I would definitely recommend that you get something a resource book like this. This is the Organic Gardener's Handbook of Natural Pest and Disease Control. And before I really get into what the usefulness of something like this is, I also want to remind you that the Abercrombie Master Gardeners, you can email them, you can call them. I know with the COVID situation that things are running a little bit slower, but they are answering questions and they can do research for you if they don't know the answer. And they are a really great source. I'm one of those people who if I haven't seen something before, I don't like calling and go, well, there's this brown spot, when I don't know how common a brown spot is. And so that's when I pull out my book and I go, hey, what am I dealing with here? What are the possibilities? And this one I like because it's organized real well. You can look up, okay, what are problems that you have in potato leaves? And it will list off different types of things and symptoms that you'll see. And then you can dig deeper into how to amend the situation. Because sometimes it's a pest and sometimes it's a deficiency of some sort or a disease. And so it's nice to just kind of know what the options are, at least before I pick up the phone and call the master gardeners and they're like, I don't know. I can say, well, do you think it's something like this? Do you think it's something like that? But certainly, you want to talk to the master gardeners with an open mind, but it doesn't hurt to be able to educate it. Now, you don't have to use this book because I know different people organize their thoughts differently. So this particular book might not work for you. I would recommend go to Amazon and look inside and see if the books that you're looking at are organized in a way that makes sense. Or maybe when the library is open, you can go to the library in the horticulture section and find books like this and find one that you're comfortable reading that makes sense to you. And then you can
go out and buy that book and have a resource that you could just thumb through. Maybe you're thinking about it 8 o'clock at night, and the master gardeners aren't going to be sitting by the phone, so um, you can pull it over. Now, I know yesterday I talked a lot about, Google's such a great resource, but not necessarily when it comes to uh, dealing with pests and diseases in plants, because a lot of the information that's out there, the treatments they're commercial, and so you will get commercials. There's also sites that have things that are just rumors and wives' tales that they're not like real. So I'm not saying don't Google things if you're not sure, but be prepared to research what you're looking at and make sure that you're getting something from a good source of information, and it's not an infomercial or somebody's opinion. Um, and definitely call the Albert County Master Gardeners, because I think that they're a great resource. So this book has helped me identify some conditions with plants, and I'm just going to talk about a few that I've had to deal with. And ones that particularly come to mind are one I just had this week, a phosphate deficiency, and that was, I noticed my tomato plants where the leaves were turning purple and getting a little crunchy and curling up. Now, it's not necessarily that there's no phosphate in the soil, though. This phosphate deficiency like that actually is probably caused more by the plant now being on a heater, because I had taken those plants off of heaters, and so they were still getting a little colder at night, so the soil was a little cold. And I think that was their problem, but also they can get too much sunlight. And I know I said in the last video that they need 13 hours of sunlight to germinate, but it's easy to go, if 13 hours is good, 24 will be great, but actually tomatoes need 8 hours of dark time in order to function properly, and so they need that for that phosphate uptake. Another condition that I've run across is blossom end rot, which is when the fruit of your tomato has a canker on the blossom end. And that is usually a calcium deficiency, but again, not necessarily that there's no calcium in your soil, but more likely some type of stress. Common ones are you've had a lot of rain and the calcium has washed out of the soil, in which case you do want to add a calcium soil amendment. In other cases, if you have drought and the plant is unable to take up calcium because there isn't enough water in the soil, in which case you can increase your watering. So, you want to do a little bit of research on different things that might be stressing your plant. You see blossom end rot, but those are probably the most common things. It's like an irregular watering, either it's too much or it's too little. And you can adjust the too little and you can amend the too much. So those are two. And another one is late blight. This can happen in potatoes and tomatoes, and that's where you start to see brown spots on your plants. Now, absolutely call a master gardener about this, because it's not the only thing that causes brown spots, but if it's been wet, there's a good chance that you have a fungal infection. And pretty much the only thing to do is to wait until a dry day. You're not going to be spreading the fungus around, and go out and pull remove the leaves of the plants or the plants that are infected, because it just spreads. It's a fungus that just spreads. Now, there are some treatments that I've heard of, but you really have to stop and consider before you apply anything to your plant, but whether or not it's going to affect your beneficial insects. So things like, you'll hear a lot about neem oil and other things that you put on them. You have to stop. Is this going to kill a honeybee if it lands on there? Is this going to kill my ladybugs? I try to avoid doing stuff like that unless it's absolutely desperate. So it might just be better to just call it a loss for the year and take the plants out. So yeah, those are the ones that I've had to deal with. the issues I've been to deal with. And yeah, that kind of covers it. I mean, I think that that's a pretty good overview of things that you're likely to see. Of course, you know, every year is a mystery, and you may run across something else. So definitely get yourself a good resource book. Definitely call the Elbert County Master Gardeners. I'm going to send out my notes on all of this. The Elbert County Master Gardeners are going to be in there. That book is going to be in there, but by all means, choose one that works for you. So yeah, that's kind of what I was going to cover today. Just get the garden ready, getting yourself prepared for what might happen next. So did anybody have any questions? Okay, I guess not. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any topics that you want to suggest for future beginning gardener Zooms, please let me know. Send me the email. And if you have questions, I'm certainly glad to answer them. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.